Welcome along to this video from smartmemorypower.com, and in this video we're going to look at how to memorize a speech. In particular, we're going to look at 3 key techniques that you can use, which are nice and simple and will get you memorizing a speech in no time at all. So let's go and get started. We're going to actually share with you some real ninja memorization techniques because, like it or not, there comes a time in most people's lives when they have to remember a speech of some kind. Whether it's in their personal life, perhaps they have to remember it for a wedding, or maybe it's a business thing, or maybe it's even at school or university. Regardless, you often have to do some kind of presentation at some point in your life, and so this will definitely help you to accomplish that, no matter what the speech is or what the context is for that speech. Now, there are multiple ways to remember things, and this is really important because you need to remember that your brain actually works in a number of different ways and on a number of different levels at any one time. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later as we go through this presentation. So right now you're at a crossroads where you could be looking at a number of different methods for learning something, and I'm going to make this hopefully a little bit more easy for you and make the whole journey a bit more straightforward. Now, the 3 simple techniques that we're going to be looking at involve association, location, and imagination, alright? And these are really key parts of memorizing anything. What's important to note is that, as I say, your brain works on a number of different levels, and in order to remember something, you need to use those different levels to remember that thing. It's all very well reading something and reading it over and over and over again and then trying to force the lines into your head, but there's much easier ways to do it, and you can learn an awful lot more with much less time investment just by using the techniques I'm going to share with you. So these are the 3 key principles that we're going to be working from. So first of all, let's turn the speech into a journey, and this is one of my favourite methods for learning things. First of all, you need some clear mental prompts and guides to remember the content of the speech and its order, alright? And in order to have these, we're going to use a very clever method that actually dates back to ancient Greece. This is what's known as the journey method. It's also known as loci, and loci is the Latin word which means places, okay, multiple places. And you'll see why it's called that as we go through this part of the presentation. So this involves picturing a journey in your mind that's familiar to you, and this could be a journey to work or to school, or it could be a journey that you have done, with friends and family, or something that's really sticks out in your mind, but it needs to be something you can remember without even having to think what the next stage is. For example, I could go from where I live right now in London to the nearest train station or the nearest tube station. I could do that because I've done that journey so many times, I would know exactly where I was going. Or I could go, from here to Knightsbridge, which is an area in London. I could do that very easily, and again, I wouldn't have to think about it. I could almost go there on autopilot if I wanted to, because it's just such a simple and obvious journey to me, because it's very familiar. You need to find a journey like that that's very familiar to you, and one that I would suggest is actually one around your home, which again I'll talk about in a moment. Now, we're going to use this journey in order to place various images along that journey which will remind you of certain things within the speech. So you'll be walking the journey in your mind, and as you go through the journey, at each point during the journey, whenever you make a turn or whenever you go past a specific point, you'll see that image in your mind, and that will remind you about what you're talking about. So how to use this for memorizing a speech in particular is that you need to break the speech down into clear images that signify things that you want to talk about, alright? So let's say that you're talking about a specific topic and there are various different elements of that you can make visual in your mind. It could be a wedding speech. Let's say it's a best man speech, for example. Well, you need to talk about certain things that have happened. You need to remind the groom of the embarrassing stories that he had. You need to remind the bride and groom of the funny things that happen during their courtship. You need to go through all of the things and the people that you need to thank. All of that stuff needs to go into the actual speech itself. So all you do is you place an image that reminds you of that particular thing that you need to talk about along the journey. Very simple technique to use this, but it's very visual, and you'll be able to see it in your mind. So rather than worrying about what the people in front of you are thinking, you can instead be walking this journey in your mind, and as you're walking the journey, you see the funny thing that happened with the groom, and then the next place you go to, you see something funny that happened when they were starting to date each other, or you see something funny that happened with the bride's father, or whatever the thing might be. So like I say, picture a journey, and this could be around your home, like I say. So you could start off at your front door, and from there go into the living room, and then go from the living room to the kitchen, and then maybe the kitchen into the dining area, wherever that is. You could go then up the stairs and go into one of the bedrooms. If there's another bedroom, go into that afterwards, and just picture all the way through. Each time you go into a room, picture something happening in that room that reminds you of the speech. So it doesn't matter if those things didn't actually happen in those rooms. It's simply just a method to pin those things into your mind in a very clear manner. Now, importantly, don't re-enter any room once you've left it in your mind. This stops you getting confused about the order of things. So what I'd suggest you actually do is to walk the journey for real a couple of times so that the order of the journey is completely clear. And you, again, should be able to do this journey in a very simple way, and it should be done in a very clear manner. So it shouldn't take any brain power at all for you to actually go on that journey in your mind. Once you've done that, once you've got the journey nice and clear, then you can actually start adding the images of the things that you need to talk about and the order that you want to talk about them in. There's also another technique where you can memorize a speech using visual links. Now, to memorize a speech word for word, this is probably a better technique for you to use. However, I would actually start out by using the journey method, and then maybe make this even more clear in your mind by using this visual linking method. So this is an associative method of remembering, which is known as the link method, and you'll see why it's called that in a second, but it should be fairly clear, purely for the fact that you will be linking the words together in your mind in a way that maybe doesn't make necessarily a lot of sense in the real world, but in your mind will make a lot of sense creatively. Again, I'll make sure that's clear for you as we go through. So you're going to form links in your mind between the different elements of the speech and actually use those to create images or scenes, and I'll give you an example of this in a second with quite a well-known speech. Now, these scenes can then be linked together to form a visual representation of the entire speech. Again, this helps you remember it word for word because you can link the words together in a very clear way, but it's a way that's kind of a bit weird. And one thing that's good to note with this is that the more weird or the more strange or the funnier or the more erotically charged or the more exciting or whatever that you can make the images, the better. If they're boring, you won't remember them, whereas if they're interesting or funny or weird or strange or sexy or whatever, then those things are much more likely to stand out in your mind, and they're things that you're much more likely to remember with a lot less effort. So let's look at a speech that is particularly well known, and this is a speech from Steve Jobs, which was from Stanford University, where he addressed the people who were graduating at Stanford University back in 2005. So this is the excerpt from the speech. He said, "I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything." So this is the thing that we're going to look at and how you'd remember this. Well, the first image is a fantastic one, getting fired from Apple. Now, in my mind, I picture an apple, but I actually picture a cannon sticking out of the apple. So as if, a little worm or something has got into the apple and is about to fire a cannon out of the apple itself. That's a really strange image, right? But I immediately remember getting fired from Apple, right? Now, what I actually picture in this is it's Steve Jobs talking. So I actually picture Steve Jobs being fired from a cannon that is stuck into the side of an apple, right? It's the weirdest image going, and it's obviously something that would never really happen, but it immediately makes me think of those particular words, getting fired from Apple, okay, and that's what we're talking about. So, he didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. Now, equally, you could also use this method around your home or around the journey that we looked at earlier on, but I don't want to confuse things too much. So that's the first image anyway. Next is the heaviness of being successful. I imagine the word success, or even the word successful, around his neck like a chain, and it's stopping him from going very far after being fired out of the cannon. Do you know what I mean? So again, this is something else that I picture in my head. Again, it's not a realistic image by any means, but it is kind of funny, and it's sort of a bit cartoon-like, which is why I think it probably sticks in my mind a bit better. Finally, the lightness of being a beginner again. I imagine him being freed from that word successful that's around his neck, and instead floating along the ground, just slightly above the ground, floating along and going into a car that has a learner sign on the side of the car. So he's going back to being a beginner again. And that's, again, something else that sticks in my mind that makes things make sense to me. And again, this is just a question of once you've formed these visual links, you actually then have to just repeat them in your mind as you go through the speech. And the more of these that you have, the more the speech is likely to jump out of the page at you. And you'll remember not only in a location kind of manner, but you'll also remember on an associative level as well, which is what this technique is all about. Now, going backwards to go forward, this is another method that works incredibly well, and I know a couple of actors who use this particular technique in order to memorize very long passages of text when they have to do a speech on stage, particularly in Shakespeare productions where the language is quite difficult to remember if you just try and remember it by just reading and reading and reading. And the technique is simple. It's going backwards to go forward, or learning it backwards. And this might sound difficult, but don't worry. When I say learn it backwards, I don't mean you reverse the entire speech and go back word for word. What I mean is that you learn the last line first, and then learn the one before it. Now, doing it this way around enables your brain to do a couple of things that memorizing it in the right order may not achieve. And that's a clearer vision. You actually get a structure of the speech because it becomes obvious. And you'll actually get to the point where you know where the speech is going. You know where you have to end up. And as a result, your brain feels much more comfortable with that and much more confident because you know where you're going to end up. And in the worst case scenario, if you completely freeze up on stage, you can simply go to as near the end as possible and pick it up from there, and keep going that way. Also, you're making your brain work and make connections. As a result, your recall will be smoother. Now, this goes into neuroscience, which I'm not going to kind of bore you with or go into too much detail right now. It's actually quite fascinating, but we don't really have time within this video. So what I'm going to do is just literally let you know that by doing this, you're going to create connections within your brain, and different parts of your brain will connect in ways that you weren't otherwise expecting. You're going to form what are known as neural pathways. So you're going to form these pathways in your brain which perhaps either didn't exist or didn't exist as strongly, and you're going to make more and more connections between them so that they will be able to fire much more effectively. And this is really all that memory is. It's about making all those connections between the different parts of your brain work really effectively, and doing it using those three principles that we talked about at the start is a wonderful way to do it. And going backwards to go forward is one of the greatest ways to do that, because you're learning the whole thing backwards, so you have a very clear idea of the structure, and also your recall becomes smoother because of the connections that you're forming in your brain that perhaps weren't there before. Finally, it's very important that we look at the time schedule that you're going to work to, and in particular how you're going to memorize these things and actually make it stick in your brain. It's really important that you review the speech after 24 hours. So learn it the first time and then leave it and go off and do something else, and then come back after 24 hours and go and look at it again. All right? It's important that you do it within the first 24 hours because that's when you're really starting to cement that thought process and those memories into your memory bank, if you like. Now again, review it after 3 days and then again after a week. These regular bits of repetition will allow you again to just cement it into your mind without putting too much pressure on yourself. Again, it's really crucial that you don't try and cram all of this stuff in, because it's actually been scientifically proven that cramming doesn't really help you very much. You actually won't learn a great deal more if you cram stuff in than if you'd been learning it consistently over a long period of time. In fact, if you learn it over a long period of time, it's actually been proven that you will recall things much better. So review it, like I say, once after 24 hours, then again after 3 days, then again after a week. Then make sure you review and practice it on a regular basis thereafter until you need to give the speech itself. Okay, so until presentation time comes, make sure you're doing regular repetitions of that speech so that it just becomes second nature to you. And using the methods that I've talked about in this video will help you a great deal. So there you have it. That's how to memorize a speech using 3 simple techniques. Make sure you subscribe to this channel, and also go and head over to smartmemorypower.com where you'll find out a lot more great information just like this. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.